Hello and welcome to your feedback lesson based on the assessment that you completed this week. This assessment was worth 45 marks. 10 marks looked at keywords from your topic on resources. There were then 10 multiple choice questions based on knowledge from development, and then an additional 10 multiple choice questions that used figures, and then there were 2 extended questions. Now, the purpose of this video is to go through the extended questions and allow you to make improvements and move forwards in terms of the knowledge and the understanding that you have based on the topic development. You might choose to have open the Word document or the PDF that I've put together so that we can do the feedback side by side. Okay, so the first question that we're going to look at is this question here, which was worth 3 marks. And it says, study the map which shows the global distribution of HDI. Using the map, describe the global distribution of HDI. So we first of all need to cube the question. So we need to circle the command word, which is describe, and then we need to underline key words. And we should also make reference to the figure. So we're looking at the map, which is below. We're describing, so we're saying what we can see. Okay, so we don't need to say why it looks like this. We just need to use things like continents, country names, oceans, lines of latitude to describe where places are similar and where places are different. And the HDI stands for the Human Development Index, and this gives us a score between 0 and 1. Okay, so let's read through. What I've done is I've put together some sentence starters, and I would like you to simply fill in the gaps, and this is the structure that you would have had to use or implement to get your 3 marks. So the HDI score stands for the Human Development Index and gives countries a score between 0 and 1. Countries with a HDI score closer to 0 are classed as being less developed. Okay. Whereas countries with a HDI score closer to 1 are classed as being more developed. Now we need to start to describe the trends. So what can we see? Well, it says here the HDI scores are randomly or evenly spread across the world. Now, if we were looking in the northern hemisphere, so north of the equator, there seems to be generally a lot of green. So we could say that, it was quite even. However, what about these random countries here? Okay, or the fact that in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, it's quite random. So if I was giving a trend, I would say that the HDI score is randomly spread out across the world. And then we need to be more specific about continents. So within these larger continents, so within North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australasia, is there a pattern or is it quite random? Well, if we were looking at the following countries, this country, continent, this continent, and this continent, we'd say that they were quite even. However, if we were talking about Asia and Africa, we would say they were quite random. So generally within continents, the spread of HDI scores, I would say, was quite even. But if you said random, that's fine. Suggesting that there is not a pattern within continents, or there is a pattern within continents. It depends on what you've said here. Okay, so this is our trends. Now we need to move on to use specific evidence to back up this statement that we have made. So evidence then. The continents which have the highest HDI score include, and you would have to give at least 2 examples. So if I was going to refer to this, I'd maybe mention North America, which is here. I'd probably mention Europe, which is here. And then I'd also probably mention Australasia or Oceania, which is here. And their HDI score is generally this darker green colour. So it's roughly between 0.84 to 0.96. Okay. Now, within the continent of North America, we need to then be more specific. So within the continent of North America, the country that has the highest scores include places like Canada, which is here, and then places like the United States of America, which is here and here, okay? And then we need to talk about continents that have a very low score. So the continents which have a low HDI score include, well, we probably need to mention Africa, and also I'd probably mention Asia. And their HDI score differs between this red colour and then also this light green. So you could say a score between 0.39 to 0.84. Okay, and then let's talk about places within Africa. So within Africa, countries which have a low HDI score, well, we're looking for these red countries that we find in Central Africa. So you could mention any from Sudan, which is here, to, where else could we pick? Mozambique, which is here. Okay, so it's about being really specific with the names of places when we are describing which have a high HDI score and which have a low HDI score. And then it's really important, if there is an anomaly, to talk about that anomaly, which leads me on to the final part of this. So we need to talk about a continent that has a high HDI score and then also has a low HDI score. So probably the best one to refer to would be either Africa or Asia. So because I've already spoken about Africa, I'm going to talk about Asia now. So the continent that has both a high HDI score and a low HDI score is Asia. And then you decide where it is. So generally, most of Asia is found in the northern hemisphere. Okay, so the country with a low HDI score, so we're looking for these red countries or these orangey countries. Let's talk about this country here, which is Afghanistan. So the country with a low HDI score is Afghanistan, and its score is between 0.39 and 0.51. And then talk about an area that has a high HDI score. So we're talking about these dark green countries. So a country that we could talk about could be, let's talk about Japan. Yeah, let's talk about Japan. Okay, so whereas Japan has a high HDI score of plus 0.84. Okay. So by looking at the trend, evidence and anomaly, we are able to confidently use our writing frame T. So remember that T is the trend, E is the evidence, A is the anomaly, and A, there we have our cut of T. Okay, so let's move on to the next question then, which was worth 12 marks. So question 23 then was, fair trade is the best way at closing the development gap. To what extent do you agree with this statement? So let's cube the question first of all. So the command word is to what extent. So we need to say why we agree. And we also need to say why we disagree. That maybe fair trade isn't the best. So keywords we need to make sure we include in our answer are fair trade, the development gap, and they would probably be the ones that you need to refer to the most. So first of all, we need to know what these words mean. So uni have got a keyword matchup. So if you know what the words mean, you're more likely to use them because you're more confident with their meaning. So all we need to do here is match the keyword to the correct definition, which is quite straightforward. So I'm not going to do that for you. But I'm just going to do one example with you. So when we're talking about closing the development gap, we're talking about making that difference between the richest countries, the most developed countries, and the poorest countries, the less developed countries. So we're trying to close that gap. Okay, so we're trying to make the HDI score smaller. So there's less people that have a score of 0 to 0.5, and more people have a score of 0.5 to 1. So this would be our definition for the development gap, and I will let you go through and do the rest on your own. Okay, so what you need to do for the final part of the lesson is you need to read through this answer. Now, this isn't a perfect answer. Yes, it would get 12 marks. It would get 3 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar because it's used paragraphs. Which is very important to use paragraphs. It also has lots of key words, and there's not any spelling mistakes. There's use of punctuation, which means that it's clear and easy to read, which is very important. But generally, the actual content, you might have written different things, and you also could have accessed your top 9 plus 3 marks. Now, when I was marking these, the best students were using the writing frame or the structure load. So they located or introduced their case study. They then talked about, on the one hand, why they agreed that fair trade was the best. And then they looked at alternative arguments. So they said, alternatively, I disagree, and they would talk about why they thought aid or why they thought debt relief was the best way of closing the development gap. And the best ones, they also had a conclusion. So if you didn't write a conclusion, you couldn't get more than 6 out of 9 marks. So this was necessary for 6 plus marks. Okay. So if we look at the success criteria, we will see that it actually says structure of work into load would be worth something worth highlighting. Now, we've already done that, so I'm going to shade that in orange. Another really important thing to do is to introduce the question. So I'm going to introduce my question. It's going to be purple. And what have I said? The widening difference in levels of development between the world's richest and poorest countries is a large problem. So this is why we need to close the development gap, with many countries having extremely low HDI scores of less than 0.5. And there are multiple ways to close the development gap, such as aid, fair trade and debt relief. So I'm using lots of words from the question, and I'm also talking about the things I'm going to mention in my answer. So that's really, really important. Now we need to talk about why we agree with the question. So those that got the best marks were using keywords constantly from the question throughout. Okay. So I've said, on the one hand, I agree that fair trade is the best way at closing the development gap. For example, fair trade makes selling products fair for farmers. That's about making it fair. And these are some of the examples of products they sell: coffee, cotton, bananas, cotton and tea. So I'm being quite specific at the minute. I'm just being quite general. I'm talking about what they sell, what fair trade is. But in order to get more marks, I need to say why that closes the development gaps. This is when it gets a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to change to my yellow colour. This is good for closing the development gap because, so I'm using keywords again from the answer, from the question. The farmer gets all the money from the sale of their crop, so the farmer benefits straight away. They have more money to spend on improving their community, so their schools, electricity, access to healthcare, access to food, improving their roads, improving their houses. But then I've also got to say why it's bad. Why is it not very good at closing the development gap? So I've said here, there are negatives. So there's many rules, which means that they can't buy more than 12 acres in size, which means they have enough produce to sell to other countries through fair trade, but they don't have enough products to sell locally to their family, their friends, or at local markets, which is a problem because it means all the products are leaving the country, which could mean that they have a food shortage. Okay, now let's look. What I'm actually not going to do, I'm not going to go through the rest with you, but I would like you to carry on doing what I've done. So you need to colour in your success criteria and you need to annotate and highlight the bits that we have done well. Okay, and hopefully this will help you the next time we do a 3-mark describe question and the next time we do an extended question, what is necessary to get those extra marks that maybe you missed out on this time. I hope this video is very helpful. If you have any questions or you'd like some more help, then please send me a message on It's Learning.